In the sunlit hall, a woman with fiery hair instructed Sarah to go to the village of Rosa and inquire with the healers about a man named Chris. She added a warning: if 4 days passed and she didn't return, there would be no turning back. Sarah then carefully packed her gear and placed everything she needed for the long journey in her bag. After this, 2 predatory wolves growled menacingly on the dense plain, but the girl, surrounded by a shining protective dome, firmly declared that the alpine animals were unwelcome guests here and should surrender. Meanwhile, she unfolded the map, carefully studying the marked route: 3 days on foot to the mountains and another 5 to the village of Rosa, where the valley began, painted in a soft pink light. Then she resolutely decided to follow her desire and see Nellie, after which she confidently walked forward under the clear sky, where the wind picked up the petals and scattered them around. That same day, Ikinakura Sarasa felt the usual fatigue as she walked along the noisy street, filled with conversations, the smell of food, and the movement of the crowd. Afterwards, the girl recalled how she'd struggled with lethargy and headaches her entire life. At that time, the teacher told the child that Sarasa-chan loved to read and draw, but rarely played with others. Then a friend asked her not to come, citing her brother's illness. Sarasa silently wished it were true, at least then she'd be able to get some rest. It was becoming increasingly difficult for her to explain her condition to others. Later, she lay down and, staring at her phone screen, fought through her tears about the impossible task she wanted to accomplish so much. A message flashed at the top from someone close, promising to stop by when she felt better. She remembered her mother's words about school being a difficult test, and, lying in silence, she thought about the romantic stories and the strict rules established by their constitution. After a while, the young woman explained that working 5 days a week, including holidays, essentially only gave her 4 full workdays. The man sitting across from her responded that weakness was no excuse for inaction. Then, sitting at the table, Sarasa felt a cautious hope, hearing that simply earning a living was enough. It was reflected in her calm, collected gaze. Later, she looked at a computer screen listing companies that met certain criteria. She thought that even she fit the criteria, albeit with limitations. Then she diligently immersed herself in her studies while 2 men watched from behind the door. In another room, colleagues discussed their long years of work, and finally, a senior employee advised the tired girl not to overexert herself. Soon, the young worker was back at her laptop, reflecting on how overtime had become the norm over the past 6 months due to a labor shortage, turning the daily routine into a physical ordeal. Afterwards, lying on her bed, she looked at the sheet of paper and thought that no matter how hard she tried, the law itself, the very foundation of the Constitution, remained unchanged. Then someone sat by the open window, feeling the light breeze and peering into the world outside the glass, wondering where exactly they were now and what had changed. Later, the girl went out onto the porch, sat down on a wooden step and suddenly asked herself out loud why she had come out at all, feeling slightly bewildered. At this time, she noticed a small figure in the reflection of the window, repeating every movement, and with some surprise she wondered if this was really her reflection. Then she ran forward, breathing evenly and convincing herself that she felt neither tired nor weak, despite the sweat and tension. Then, out of breath but looking around with a happy expression, she realized she could run freely. A feeling of elation washed over her, and she spread her arms, letting her body dissolve in the ease of movement. The girl noticed a bird flying overhead, and then saw several deer nearby, calmly grazing at the edge of the forest. She was overcome with mild surprise and curiosity, as everything around her exuded silence and peace. However, suddenly a dragon fell from the sky like a stone, grabbing one of the deer in its claws. The earth shook as the giant creature soared back into the sky, and the girl watching nearby froze, disbelieving her eyes. After that, she watched the vanished dragon with apprehension, but before she could breathe a sigh of relief, a low growl sounded behind her. Turning around, she saw a huge wolf, its fur standing on end, and froze between fear and disbelief. Then fear burst forth, and the girl screamed, seeing the wolf-like beast slowly approaching, baring its fangs. Panic gripped her insides, the thought of death flashed instantly, but she desperately refused to accept it. Meanwhile, the boy, despite his weakness, ran with a joyful smile, seemingly oblivious to the danger. Nearby, a girl with a long ponytail defended the seated child, holding a spear against an enraged lion roaring with wild force. After this, the warrior with the tail shouted to the others to follow her, and the other, stunned by what was happening, wondered who this brave stranger was who appeared at the most desperate moment. Later, the rescued girl quietly thanked the woman with the scythe for her help, and she, without saying a word, merely nodded and walked away. The girl watched her go silently, feeling a strange warmth and a slight sadness. Then a scream rang out in the house. The girl ran inside, out of breath, shouting that the dogs were coming, and that there were several of them. Growling could still be heard outside, and for a moment the air filled with anxiety. The girl rushed toward the boy sitting by the door. He was silent, contemplating his short life, but suddenly cried out sharply when another wolf appeared in the doorway, baring its teeth menacingly at them. She then quickly explained that there was a barrier preventing the alpine wolves from entering. The boy, still pressed to the floor, watched with interest and bewildered amazement as an invisible force stopped the beasts. A moment later, the girl screamed sharply for no one to do anything, and the small child clung to her leg in fear. However, the wolf standing nearby didn't attack unexpectedly, only growling, as if expecting something. Afterwards, she carefully asked the boy if he was in any pain. He admitted he'd been afraid of dogs since childhood and added regretfully that he'd left the door open without thinking about the consequences. The girl, her eyes moist, admitted she was crying, even though she was no longer a child. Meanwhile, a figure with long hair, busy cleaning the cluttered kitchen, calmly told her to sit down and catch her breath. Having calmed down a bit, she reflected on the words of the goddess who had sent her into the body of a 10-year-old girl. She had also mentioned a world called Trilgaia, where the soul would go after reincarnation. Later she was asked if she was a guest and she nodded, explaining that she thought that everything that happened before was just a dream, but now she understands that there was a reason behind it. In a snow-white room, a girl lay on a bed, and next to her stood a tall figure with loose hair. She calmly said that a new life in another world would soon begin. The reclining girl thought she was dreaming, but the graceful stranger explained that her body needed magic. She was born in a place where this power was almost non-existent, and sometimes souls mistakenly end up in another world. Then she added that the goddess had predicted a short lifespan for her in the previous world, and therefore her constant fatigue was caused by a lack of magical energy. After this, the interlocutors discussed how someone insisted on taking the boy, as if kidnapping him, and sending him to the one who needs him most. This is what the goddess ordered. The girl wondered if perhaps that beautiful young woman was the one who needed her most. However, deep down, she felt like a stranger, like an uninvited traveler in a world where no one was waiting for her. The narrator explained that strangers, called guests, occasionally appear in this world. A kitchen was visible in the background, with neatly arranged dishes and fresh ingredients ready for dinner. It then became known that the guests were capable of infinitely absorbing and using magical power, leading many to become hunters. However, the excess of magic in the world created problems. The girl introduced herself and told about the other settlers, and the boy sheepishly asked her not to remain alone. Then she hesitantly admitted that she couldn't become a hunter, having once nearly died. A nearby wolf, glaring furiously, asked if this was the kind of creature they were talking about when they spoke of prey. Later, two girls were discussing the nobility. One noted that the invited woman could marry an aristocrat, and the second remembered that nobles lived in huge, carefully guarded mansions. At that moment, the dark-haired girl abruptly refused the offer, while her fair-haired companion watched her with alarm, trying to understand the reason for her determination. Lying on her bed, she thought she didn't want to repeat the past, and then quietly admitted that she had spoken to the young man next to her more harshly than she had intended. Her voice wavered, but there was sincerity in it. After this, she ran outside into the open space and exclaimed with delight that she could now run without pain and fatigue, enjoying every movement. Soon her desire intensified. She passionately dreamed of traveling, seeing new places, and doing things she hadn't been able to before. The world around her seemed boundless and calling her forward. The girl asked the sitting child if he felt any pain again, and heard in response that now he was not in pain and life felt clearer than ever before. Then the long-haired storyteller calmly explained that they were at northern Devil Mountain, where wyverns flew in the sky, herds of deer roamed the plains, and alpine wolves ran along the slopes. She added that the nearest town was 3 days' journey away for an adult, but it would be completely impossible for a child to get there in a day. Meanwhile, the short-haired woman remarked that no matter how worried he was, he wouldn't leave the house until he was strong enough. The boy listened attentively, realizing the truth of her words. Inside the hut, a determined girl firmly stated that she must learn to function even in limited circumstances. Her voice was filled with confidence, mingled with stubbornness. In the other corner, the long-haired girl watched with concern as someone explained that his roommate was kind and strong, even though she lived in complete disarray. The girl gratefully thanked him for his help and introduced herself as Ikinakura Saresa. Her companion listened silently, standing in the middle of the cluttered room, where comfort reigned amidst the chaos. When asked about her name, the other one responded with slight excitement, calling herself Nellie, and, hearing her name repeated with curiosity, she smiled warmly in response. The girl hesitantly extended her hand, but Nellie gently leaned forward and introduced herself again, adding a sincere smile. In that moment, genuine trust was established between them. Then one of them offered to clean up before dinner, and the boy, watching from the sidelines, reflected on how little he knew about Devil's Mountain and its ruler. Everything that was happening felt like the beginning of a new life. Soon, the girl enthusiastically shouted that this was her last attempt, when a huge dog growled behind her. She hurried toward the house, realizing she couldn't leave its confines just yet. Afterwards, she joyfully declared that she wouldn't eat without working, and declared cleaning and cooking her responsibilities. The kitchen filled with light and movement, heralding the beginning of a peaceful life. The girl noted with satisfaction that a tidy room created a pleasant atmosphere. While cleaning, she admitted to herself that it had been difficult at first, but now a sense of comfort and peace had become second nature. The next day, the two friends entered the new space and were surprised to find it resembled a real home. Then, sitting at the table, they discussed the monotonous menu of bread, cured meats, and fruit that accompanied them throughout every meal. Meanwhile, Nellie, who lived at the foot of Devil's Mountain, hunted monsters. Every 10 days, she descended to town to sell the materials she'd collected and buy the necessary supplies for life in the mountains. After 3 days alone, the girl felt relieved. Nellie had bought all the tools and spices in advance, allowing her to tackle many of the tasks she had previously put off. As she sliced the meat, she felt slightly nervous, thinking that she was gradually becoming accustomed to the body of a 10-year-old. She was amused by the thought of what kind of meat Nellie herself might have been, had she been the prey. Later, noticing the woman's return, the girl joyfully ran to greet her. The second, observing the scene, guessed it must be Nellie. She, smiling shyly, admitted that she already felt at home here. At dinner, the girl inquired about what would be on the table that day, and her companion thoughtfully remarked that she was beginning to see something charming in Nellie. Plates of beef fillet and fragrant vegetable soup sat to the side. Later, during a conversation, the girl asked how people made money in this world. The woman calmly replied that the fastest way was to gather medicinal herbs, as even hunters usually start out that way. With a smile on her face, the girl picked flowers and happily realized she'd gathered enough for the day. Meanwhile, the other girl thought she needed to become stronger so she could one day repay Nellie for her care. They sat across from each other at the table. The elder reminded them that they couldn't stay here forever, as they had made a promise to the goddess. The younger expressed a desire to descend to the city now that she had gained sufficient strength and confidence. Then she admitted that in the previous world she had given up after numerous failed attempts. The man sitting across from her thought perhaps now he would have a chance to start over. The girl confirmed what she had heard, and Sarah took out 2 books, a guide to magic and a herbalist of medicinal plants, explaining that she had bought them in the city. The short-haired interlocutor noted that Sarah should not take up the sword and advised her to begin learning magic, as this was the path that suited her. She added that both magic and medicinal herbs were able to protect Nellie, thereby showing deep concern and a desire to help. The girl hugged the woman with unexpected warmth and thanked her. Then, realizing her suddenness, she sheepishly apologized, and the woman, with slight concern, asked if everything was okay. The two exchanged gentle smiles. The elder replied that nothing terrible had happened. Meanwhile, a wolf's howl echoed in the distance under the moon, a reminder that magic still lay ahead. A little while later, the girl watched anxiously as wolves approached the house, and a woman standing nearby explained that the alpine creatures began to gather around after Sarah's appearance. A tall woman with a tail explained that the animals were likely waiting for the captive to emerge. Introducing herself, she identified herself as Nellie, the guardian of Devil's Mountain. The younger one explained that she had been reincarnated as a 10-year-old child and now longed to live independently. In the background stood a small house surrounded by mountains and a protective barrier, with monsters prowling outside. Finally, she admitted that she wanted to earn her own money by collecting medicinal herbs. For her, this was the first step toward independence and proof that a new life had truly begun. The determined girl raised her hand, firmly declaring that she must master magic. In one hand, she held a book, in the other, a list of tasks: learn spells, leave the hut, and gather medicinal herbs to begin her own journey. They then discussed how every inhabitant of this world possesses magical power, but using it as a spell requires rigorous training. One of them excitedly imagined what magic from another world might look like, and her eyes lit up with curiosity. The girl with the ponytail remarked that perhaps it was her turn to try. In response, the other froze, hesitant to say a word, and then looked at her interlocutor in surprise, not expecting such confidence. Sarah thought she'd always known Nellie didn't like to talk much. A wolf yawned nearby, and Nellie, suppressing her irritation, scolded the child for not being the best teacher. Since the passing of a month, she had easily accepted the unexpected proximity and even grown accustomed to it. Sitting by the window, she read a book, her sword lying beside her, and felt that she liked this peace. She later apologized for her distraction when Nellie showed her something important. Holding the framed photograph, Sarah wondered how Nellie now perceived life on Devil's Mountain. Suddenly, a soft glow flared somewhere, and Nellie ordered them to stay put, then warned them to be careful. When a clenched hand and the silhouette of a wolf flashed into view, the air instantly filled with tension. Then the mentor explained that her magic strengthened the body, turning it into a weapon capable of withstanding any blow if the energy flowed correctly. Sarah cautiously asked if this meant transforming her inner strength into true magic. The girl joyfully declared that such magic was amazing, since that was how he'd managed to save her. Her voice rang with genuine admiration for the power of spells. He nodded, agreeing that he had to strengthen his body, but a look of alarm flashed in his student's eyes. She was afraid that she would not be able to withstand the attack of the alpine wolf and did not know if she had enough strength to respond. Meanwhile, a girl with a determined gaze stood on the bridge. Someone nearby gently suggested that she try to imagine her second nature, the source of her inner strength, and promised to teach her how to control this energy. The book on magic stated that the power of witchcraft was equal to the skill of the magician who controlled it. It also mentioned Nellie's second nature and energy source, which served as the basis for understanding magical currents. Sarah felt energy rising from deep within the earth. She imagined herself gathering it in her palms, squeezing it until it became harder than iron, pure, focused, and obedient to her will. The girl with the ponytail tried something and said with satisfaction that it tasted good. A nearby observer noted with interest that Sarah seemed ready for the next step. Then one of them squeezed the other's hand tightly, and the other, trembling with excitement, admitted she was still a newbie and asked not to press so hard. Their fingers trembled, but the connection between them grew stronger. Looking straight ahead, the girl declared it was time to check if alpine wolves bite. Her companion caught her breath and admitted she wasn't intimidated by the other woman's strength, though she felt out of place. Then one of them asked why Sarah never ran out of magic. In response, the other calmly remarked that true power comes only through experience and constant practice, not from innate gift. The girl explained that guests are able to absorb external magical energy, allowing them to cast spells indefinitely. However, if the source dries up, the magic will disappear completely. Sarah reflected on her own strength, realizing that since Nellie hadn't crushed her in training, she truly had potential. Fear and determination warred in her heart, giving birth to a relentless desire to prove herself capable of more. Then she confidently stepped toward the huge wolf growling at the edge of the clearing. Nellie stood beside her, holding her hand tightly, and both braced themselves for what was to come. The girl recalled being bitten by a monster on the first day of her magical training. Her friend, listening to the story, was surprised, then noticed that Nellie had gone off to hunt monsters, leaving them alone for a while. Meanwhile, Sarah, determined to surprise her mentor, stood on a stool at the kitchen table. Glancing at the piece of meat, she firmly resolved to cook dinner for Nellie herself, even if she had to improvise. The girl admitted that she doesn't usually hunt such creatures, but she's certain that even stone monsters can be made into a delicious dish. This thought astonished her companion, who hadn't expected such boldness. Nellie was cheerfully stirring something in a frying pan, happy to be trusted with the cooking. At that moment, Sarah offered to help with the chopping, again surprising her mentor, who was used to doing everything herself. Later, the girl tried to get something from the top shelf, wanting to repay her for her care. However, she couldn't reach her goal. Then Nellie arrived, happily showing that she already had the desired item in her hands. Over dinner, they started talking about magical devices powered by energy stones. Sarah looked around the house in amazement and admitted she couldn't believe her eyes. There was a water heater and a washing machine, as if they belonged in the modern world. After that, she quietly placed the plate in the oven and thought that magic manifests itself not only in spells, but also in things that make life easier and warmer. The girl confidently declared that she was no longer afraid of alpine wolf bites, as she could now strengthen her body after a fight. Her companion, looking confused, asked what to do with the accumulated magic. Then Sarah imagined the wolf trying to bite her again, and her face registered worry. Nellie, standing nearby, noticed this and, with slight irritation, told her not to overdramatize, as fear was interfering with her concentration. Meanwhile, the two wolves watched each other, as if conversing wordlessly, one of them snapping its fangs mockingly. And inside the house, the girl felt a sense of relief, remembering that the magical barrier reliably protected them. Late that evening, Nellie returned home, tired but happy, and smilingly explained that she'd checked the wards and strengthened the barrier's spell. Sarah greeted her joyfully, relieved that everything was in order. Over dinner, the girl animatedly explained how magic could strengthen muscles to repel wolves. She offered to demonstrate the technique during the meal, but Nellie, laughing, insisted they eat first. A fried gargoyle with sauce and herbs was placed on the table. Someone remarked that this dinner felt more like a real celebration than an ordinary meal. The dark-haired student smiled awkwardly, and the woman with the ponytail expressed hope that everything had worked out as expected. Then Sarah quietly uttered her mentor's name, as if acknowledging her accomplishment. The girl, her eyes shining, exclaimed that the food was simply delicious, and Nellie thanked her for her efforts and patience, watching her delight with a touch of pride. Sarah laughed cheerfully, admitting she was glad to hear the praise. Meanwhile, the other looked impatient, and the boy, noticing the huge brushes in the bathroom, thought about the strangeness of this world and eagerly anticipated his walk with Nellie. That evening, feeling sleepy by 10 o'clock, Sarah announced with a smile that tomorrow would be the start of her second day of training. A huge dog stood at her feet, growling softly, as if testing her resolve. In the morning, two silhouettes emerged into the clearing and ordered the wolves to leave. Sarah calmly noted that the situation had improved, then raised her hands, creating a glowing magical shield around herself. The girl explained how to direct energy outward to harden the body. A nearby student was surprised to feel a protective sphere form around her, and a third had already raised her sword, preparing to test its strength. Erica shouted for everyone to stay still and, without waiting for a response, struck out with her sword. At that moment, the other one closed her eyes in shock. She hadn't expected the training to be such a daunting ordeal. The woman calmly advised the girl not to close her eyes when the enemy stood before her, as fear made her vulnerable. However, the girl, with tears in her voice, replied that she didn't want to fight at all, surprising her companion, who was watching nearby. Afterwards, she reassured him that everything was fine and added that she had an advanced potion. When he cautiously asked what would happen if it didn't work, she only smiled calmly. Mina confidently said that such potions are capable of healing almost any wound, but the other girl admitted that she had never seen them and did not know what they actually look like. The girl warned the boy inside the protective bubble not to make any rash moves. But he lost his balance and tumbled down the slope, and she screamed his name, seeing a large wolf nearby become alert. The boy continued to roll inside the sphere, pursued by two wolves. Then the girl realized she had to stop the movement without breaking the magical barrier, and she concentrated, preparing to act. She summoned sharp spikes to halt her slide, secured the barrier, and landed softly. Only then did she realize she had stopped right in front of the enormous creature breathing down her neck. The girl stood inside the glowing shield, and the enraged alpine wolves couldn't break through. She realized with relief that the barrier was truly protecting her, and for the first time, she felt confident. Then Sarah called out to Nellie, noticing her frozen in front of the strange creature. Another woman nearby calmly said the protection had worked and asked if she was injured. Nellie replied, relieved, that everything was fine. The man next to her looked surprised, but Sarah quickly apologized, explaining that she'd thoughtlessly moved the unstable barrier, putting everyone at risk. She tried to figure out if it mattered if the shield had been cut. She then confidently explained that she had reinforced the ground with stakes and thus immobilized the alpine wolves, adding that they could now safely head to the city. The girl, still trapped within the glowing barrier, realized she couldn't move. The other watched her closely, debating whether to advance toward the village next year, strengthening the soil with spells. Outside, in the gentle breeze, Sarah joyfully announced that she would now be able to gather medicinal herbs. Her companion listened attentively, savoring the rare moment of peace. The girl animatedly asked if it was really that funny, to which the woman laughed, calling her surprisingly optimistic. Meanwhile, the third participant in the scene smiled silently, looking at her with warmth. Sarah admitted that she enjoyed spending time with her and that she felt cared for and supported. Her interlocutor listened silently, but a touching expression appeared in her eyes. As they returned to the house, they both felt a sense of satisfaction and lightness. Along the way, they recalled Nellie's words, realizing she was right, many difficulties lay ahead, but they were prepared for them. Later, Sarah reflected that the barrier's magic was far less flexible than it had seemed in theory. A woman with long hair walking alongside her shared tips on how to make her spells more resilient. The girl thought she'd definitely come up with something new, as her inspiration hadn't run dry. Meanwhile, they walked side by side, watching the town of Rosa in the distance, shimmering in the evening sun. Suddenly, one of them stopped and said with a slight smile that she would tell her something important later. Sarah was surprised, not realizing how significant these words would be. The woman held the child's hand tightly when a large wolf suddenly emerged from behind the trees. They both flinched, and the boy cried out that there shouldn't be any more wolves, but the beast didn't retreat. The girl asked if they needed a bag to store the herbs, and the other nodded approvingly, noting that without one, it would be impossible to begin collecting. After that, both headed toward the forest, preparing for a new day of work. The girl showed him a small pouch hanging from her belt, explaining that she could put things in it. Only now did she realize she hadn't mentioned this before. The boy examined the bag with interest, standing inside the protective bubble, wondering how it worked. Later, she knelt beside the fallen wyvern and explained that its body could be used as a magical tool. The others exchanged surprised glances, and one of them quickly clarified that that wasn't what she meant. Two girls sat on the grass, and one explained that items placed in this pouch would not spoil and would remain fresh. Upon hearing this, the other gasped in delight, amazed by the artifact's capabilities. On the first day of the fair, the girl, beaming with anticipation, asked if she could also have a bag like this one, the one that seemed to stop time. She could barely contain her excitement. When she returned from Machiki village, her body felt unusually light. It later turned out that her bag had nearly swallowed a monster named Momono Nelly. This discovery made her wary. After this, the girl exclaimed that she absolutely needed her own storage bag. The woman next to her nodded calmly and promised to buy one in the city as soon as possible. Sarah asked how much it would cost, but the teacher, smiling, offered to carry her bag for now. Then the girl quickly asked to wait, wanting to see if she had enough money. Later, they discussed the list of 6 medicinal herbs. Sarah was surprised there were so few of them, and Nellie explained that these are the plants most often used in potions and are quite rare. The girl joyfully showed off the glittering pouch, proudly declaring it was worth 300,000 gil and could even hold a wyvern. She looked as if she were holding a treasure. Then, with a determined expression, she declared that she would try her best, and despite the small size of her bag, she set off to gather medicinal herbs. A burning anticipation of the new experience filled her chest. Standing inside the protective barrier, Sarah noticed its range was no more than a few meters from the house. She shouted to someone to wait, but realized she'd have to proceed with caution. Later, she turned her attention to the plants, carefully trimming the tops of the leaves and leaving the roots intact. Her movements were precise, and her face glowed with joy at the simple task. Suddenly, a light flashed around her, and she found herself trapped in a magical bubble, surrounded by a multitude of slimes. The girl realized she couldn't collect them all and had to come up with another way. She realized that the slugs were feeding on the garbage from the house and decided to clear the slope of waste to prevent them from breeding again. This thought gave her determination. Then Sarah decided to use the magic she'd read about in her textbook. She remembered that the 4 basic elements are fire, wind, earth, and water, and chose flame as the most effective weapon against the slugs. She pondered how magic worked and dreamed of a sci-fi-like targeting function. But the fear of creating too much flame forced her to focus solely on controlling the fire. The girl concentrated energy into her fingertip and cast a spell. A sphere of flame erupted, causing the nearest slug to recoil in shock from the unexpected impact. Sarah quietly whispered what had happened, and suddenly noticed a glowing magic stone on the ground. She remembered that after defeating monsters, such sources of power fell from their bodies. The narrator explained that magical tools were powered by clots of mana, which, after the death of a creature, crystallized into a stone that took the form of a wolf demon. The mentor advised Sarah, when hunting monsters, it's important not only to obtain meat for food but also to use the right tools, as the magic stone is the most important part of the trophy. Sarah thought about it, feeling responsible for every choice she made. After Sarah defeated a few more slugs, she happily continued collecting herbs. Soon, a tall figure with long hair asked if she'd managed to collect more, and the girl sheepishly admitted she wasn't sure. It was difficult to count accurately. Weeks passed, and winter arrived. The house smelled of hot broth. They were preparing a hearty meal to help them through the cold days, surrounded by snow and the silence of the mountain peaks. Sarah joyfully called out that the meat was braised and ready. The woman sitting on a low stool by the stove remarked that it looked delicious and invited everyone to the table, enjoying the warmth of the fire. The girl then proudly declared that she could now handle the cockatrice herself. Her companion laughed, remembering how she had been terrified of the monster's snake-like feathers when she first saw it. Sarah explained that meat can be kept fresh by storing it in a storage bag, where time seems to stand still. She then asked if it would be a good idea to stockpile some of the food in this way. They discussed how it would be more convenient if Nellie stayed home, as her illness had weakened her. Then one of them suggested making a bento box and a bottle to keep the food fresh longer. Sarah admitted she'd never been sick and added wistfully that she wanted to fill her bag with everything she needed to one day defeat a mammoth. She wondered, though, whether her mentor lived in the present or only planned for the future. The woman explained that behaving too unusually could attract attention. Even if it increased sales, people would start to suspect something was wrong and ask where they were going. Later, they discussed whether they should pack provisions for Nellie if she couldn't reach the city. Someone suggested packing food and water in airtight containers for use on the road. The woman calmly added that unusual actions can indeed increase the number of customers, but at the wrong time and place they arouse suspicion, especially in small villages. Soon Sarah awkwardly admitted that it was she who was holding the demons back from leaving the mountain, and that was why they didn't want to let her go far. After all, the barrier was held up by her magic. The girl opened a basket full of herbs and medicinal plants and happily noted that it would last 10 days. Then, looking excitedly into the bag, she began talking about her upcoming trip to the city. She told Nellie she'd go ahead, opened the door, and stepped outside. Nearby, amid the snowdrifts, stood a huge wolf, watching her with a piercing gaze but showing no aggression. The girl with short dark hair explained that the barrier belonged to Sarah. The taller companion listened attentively, noting that seeing this magic in action seemed unusual every time. Sarah described a mechanism capable of reflecting an opponent's power back. The audience looked at each other, amazed by this solution, and the third participant thanked her shyly, hesitating to ask the next question. Smiling, the girl thought that this would be her first trip with Nellie. Joy grew in her heart as she carefully laid out the provisions on the table, planning everything down to the last detail. 6 months ago, in the spring, Sarah learned from a cheerful child that the barrier allowed her to leave the house. A huge wolf stood nearby, silently watching her, as if checking to see if she was ready for freedom. The girl showed a map, explaining that the journey from the mountain to the city of Rosa would take 5 days. She marked the route from start to finish with a red line, representing the challenges ahead. She realized that they would have to set up camp that night under the protection of a magical barrier, maintaining its strength throughout the journey. This thought filled her with determination. After all, the responsibility now lay with her. Afterwards, they discussed preparations for the journey, food supplies, tents, and amulets. Nellie purchased some of the necessary items, and Sarah calculated how much money they needed to raise, as magical tools were expensive. The girl raised her hand excitedly and declared she would buy it right then and there. The man at the table looked at her in surprise, not expecting such haste, and asked if she was sure of her decision. Sarah happily thought that enhanced security had tripled her herb-gathering income, but purchasing magical equipment was still an unaffordable luxury. Then she unexpectedly discovered a bunch of poisonous plants, worth 20 times more than regular medicinal ones. Her companion explained that they had returned the remaining money from the cash register and prepared some equipment: a lamp, dishes, tea, protective boxes, a portable stove, and warm mats and blankets. All of this seemed like a solid foundation for the upcoming journeys. Time passed quickly, spring gave way to summer, and then came autumn. A squirrel sat by a tree, a butterfly settled on a flower, and Sarah suddenly realized that exactly a year had passed since her arrival in this world. The girl cheerfully announced that it was time for their first nighttime training session. The boy next to her happily agreed, and together they began packing, preparing to hit the trail. One admitted she hadn't slept outdoors in a while, feeling a little nervous. Then the other reminded them that they weren't playing anymore, they had to be on guard, as any inattention could be dangerous here. Two figures walked along the trail next to the horses, talking about how Nellie always made it to town without stopping overnight. One said the journey took a whole day, while the other added that that was precisely why they needed to get used to camp life. They stopped on a rise among tall trees, overlooking the mountain valleys. The woman asked if Sarah was tired, and she replied that she had barely left the cabin for the past 6 months. The girl then firmly promised to accompany her hunting partner as often as possible. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the rocky road, and the wind swayed the branches, as if bolstering their resolve. They discussed how they hadn't seen a single wolf since descending from the mountains and assumed they had abandoned their den. But a sudden, low growl forced them both to hide behind a tree trunk. A small creature flew out of the darkness, and Sarah recoiled. The next moment, a glowing timber wolf appeared from behind the bushes, surrounded by its fellows, their eyes glittering in the darkness. The girl quietly said that she was stronger than alpine wolves, which is why they rarely attacked. The woman next to her nodded warily and added that such creatures were often encountered nearby, especially at night. Sarah watched as several wolves approached the fallen beast. A woman with long hair explained that it had broken its neck because it refused to surrender. The girl froze in silence, struck by the severity of these words. Then one of them said the wolf's death was due to Sarah's barrier, as they were trapped and unable to escape. The other awkwardly admitted she didn't know what to do next, and the first suggested selling the captive in town, while two wolves growled nearby. Soon, a bear's growl was heard, and Sarah turned around in fear. Her companion explained that alpine wolves were much smarter and stronger than forest animals, and therefore should be handled with extreme caution. She explained that whenever the monsters tried to attack Sarah, her barrier would reflect the blow, killing them. The girl paused, realizing that even protection could be deadly. Sarah noticed the glittering magical stones on the ground and explained that the guardians cast spells that created movement even if she resisted. The other woman remained silent, concentrating on her training. Then she listened attentively as the mentor spoke of the need to exterminate the monsters in the mountains, comparing them to pests whose numbers must be kept in check for safety. Afterwards, the woman warned the boy not to leave the house lest he get hurt. She knelt inside the magic circle, and he cautiously approached, watching the glow. The girl admitted that she was to blame for what had happened, but her tall companion gently reassured her. They walked together under the treetops, and, walking in the shade of the branches, Sarah felt the world become a little calmer again. Sarah explained that the materials could only be sold to the person who had personally harvested the monster. She then suggested executing the sale on behalf of someone else so that the profit wouldn't be wasted. Two figures stood on a small bridge over a stream, discussing how selling magic stones from slugs and timberwolves was only allowed after the age of 12, that's when you could join the guild. The girl learned that to become a huntress, she had to register with the guild upon reaching 12 years of age. Since she was only 11, she still had a year left before her long-awaited independence. Suddenly, she cried out in pain, noticing blisters on her foot. A companion standing nearby immediately ran over and anxiously asked what had happened. The woman said that if she applied the medicinal herb directly to her skin, it would heal by morning. The child sighed with relief, deciding it was time to do some exercise after his 3-hour walk. The girl calmly said she'd already eaten and was going to continue working. They told her not to overexert herself, as another would remain nearby, gathering herbs and keeping an eye on her. A glowing creature, a slime demon, flickered at the edge of my vision. It vanished so quickly it seemed as if it had never existed. Sarah reflected on the rarity of magical stones and how they were used to create storage bags. She understood the huge demand for them, and quietly thought that perhaps her chance had come. She spotted a stray slug behind a rock. Remembering how she'd seen them near the house before but never caught them, she decided to use fire to track it, despite her doubts. The girl slammed the ground hard, causing a splash from which a magical stone emerged. She sank to her knees, looking around in confusion, trying to figure out where it had come from. An opal glinted in the grass. The find was incredibly valuable. Sarah smiled, imagining Nellie's surprise if she showed her the find, but at that moment, a huge dragon swooped over the forest clearing. Meanwhile, another woman was walking through the forest with a lantern in hand, thinking she'd been hunting longer than usual and leaving Sarah alone. Then she called her name, hoping to hear a response in the silence. A story came up in conversation about a wyvern that fell from the sky, its impact cushioned by a powerful barrier. Everyone was amazed that the creature had managed to recover like a timber wolf, and someone suggested storing the body in a storage bag. A girl with short dark hair exclaimed that the loot was too big to fit in her bag, and a small figure nearby looked up in amazement. Sarah explained that she had activated the barrier to keep the timber wolves away from the wyvern's corpse, as if she had tried to put it in her bag, the camp would have been left defenseless. They then decided to eat for now, agreeing to stash the wyvern in a bag later. One apologized for the delay, while the other, slightly wearily, remarked that she was just getting used to the peace and quiet. The night sky enveloped the camp, where magical barrier boxes stood. A special key and a grinding stone were required to enter and exit. Everything seemed secure and meticulously designed. The girl crouched down and asked if everything was set up correctly, holding one of the boxes in her hands. The one standing next to her confirmed that there should be 4 of them, one for each compass direction. Sarah noticed the rain barrier and was surprised by its effectiveness. Her partner explained its purpose, and then they found a food basket, deciding they could now sleep peacefully. The girl explained that the guild sells simple camping food sets for 1,500 yen, which can be returned if you return the container. However, the taste left much to be desired. The food was cold and tasteless. The girl excitedly explained how they could use storage bags to keep cooked food warm. Her companion listened attentively, and then the scene changed. They were sitting by the fire, and someone called out to Sarah, causing her to turn around in surprise. That night, by the fire, 2 girls raised their mugs with smiles, savoring the warm food, warmed by magic. One praised the taste, and the other noted with satisfaction that her advanced preparation had been worth it. They lay side by side under the starry sky, gazing up at the shimmering heavens. One said it was nice to sleep next to someone, and the other quietly agreed, feeling a rare sense of peace. Sarah explained that she'd created a warm airflow inside the tent to keep everyone warm. She recalled Nellie mentioning some app for body enhancement, but her partner replied that such abilities were called invited and weren't acquired overnight. After a short pause, one of the girls asked Sarah if it had been hard for her to leave anything behind. Sarah sighed deeply, looking up at the sky, not immediately finding an answer. Then the boy lying nearby began to think about how difficult it can be to let go of the past. The girl in bed suddenly wondered why he was talking about the lives of the invited and their transition into this world. After a while, Sarah exclaimed with joy, showing off her hard-earned savings. Her companion looked at her wearily and doubtfully, but with a slight smile. The girl calmly said that if it was her family, then everything was fine. After all, they had supported her in the old world. The girl, surprised, asked if she was sure of that, but Sarah only nodded. After that, she confidently added that her family would understand if she disappeared. The dark-haired boy agreed, noting that he should just stay away for a while, and Nellie listened silently, without interrupting. Sarah smiled with her eyes closed and said that Nellie was like family to her now. Her words rang softly and sincerely in the evening silence. The next day, the girl, resting under a tree, admitted that perhaps that was true. Then the other girl wondered how Nellie had been raised by her family and decided to train Sarah as if she were her own. Sarah thoughtfully noted that she didn't remember exactly how Nellie had been there. Her partner quietly suggested that she'd simply been tired and fallen asleep without noticing. In the morning, the girl greeted Sarah, who was lying there, barely able to figure out what time it was. Suddenly, a growl was heard, and her companion quickly ordered Sarah to follow her. They paused amid the wilderness, watching deer, wolves, and a flying dragon. Sarah couldn't help but realize how real this strange yet beautiful world had become. Later, the girl approached a seated woman named Sar and wished her good morning, asking if she was having trouble sleeping. The woman calmly replied that everything was fine. The young companion carefully took Sarah's hands, gently asking her to share if anything was bothering her. Her gaze held genuine concern. Sarah quietly said she wanted to help Nellie, feeling a debt of gratitude. Her partner responded passionately that Nellie was always there and supported them both, no matter what. In a wooden room, two girls sat opposite each other. One explained that she was tasked with guarding the mountain from spring to autumn and exterminating monsters threatening the nearby town. Sarah felt guilty about perhaps causing Nellie trouble, which was why she was forced to stay in the house all winter. Her gaze dropped, and her thoughts grew heavy. Then her partner tried to stop Sarah when she raised her hand to speak. Meanwhile, the third figure calmly explained that they were allowed to live in the cabin year-round, but sometimes there were winter calls when help was truly needed. The two figures sat side by side on chairs, admiring the picturesque panorama and engaging in a measured conversation about how requests for meetings most often come from those who are truly good at their job. Then the scene changed. Against the backdrop of a tranquil landscape among the hills, wolves and a deer stood, and one of the characters explained that last year they had already refused a dangerous task and could do it again if they wanted. Later, the two girls sat outside. One admitted she couldn't handle the pressure, while the other thoughtfully said that perhaps this time she wouldn't be able to refuse, recalling their complicated relationship. Then one of them confidently declared that she was staying with Sarah of her own free will and had no intention of backing down. Hearing this, her partner enthusiastically suggested that they consider agreeing to the request. A little later, they sat opposite each other by the window. One hesitated, unsure of what to say, while the other admitted that she had simply never thought about such things before. The woman worried about leaving Sarah in the capital under safeguard, but the thought of the girl being taken away terrified her. Meanwhile, Sarah anxiously wondered why she hadn't been allowed to go with him. The girl quietly apologized, explaining that she couldn't make a decision right away. She added that she would talk to someone she trusted when she went into town the next day. Sarah expressed hope of finding a way out and even a willingness to walk to the Pink City, and her friend happily supported her, suggesting that they think through everything together. The next day, Nellie set out for the city of Rosa. Before leaving, she told Sarah to be careful, and Sarah reminded her that she'd made lunch, her favorite sandwich. Meanwhile, a figure stood on the sunset roof, thoughtfully asking himself whether the guild leader, Chris from the Healers Union, was the only person he could trust, since it was with him that he would meet. The girl counted the days on her fingers, while another girl next to her explained that even with enormous magical power, the guild leader was stubborn and completely tactless. She added that she usually returns in 3 days, but this time she might be delayed, and if she does not appear within 4, then Sarah should contact Chris from the Healers Guild. Soon Nellie turned around in response to a call. Someone said her name and reminded her that, despite her loneliness, she had an important goal that could not be postponed. The conversation touched on a town near an underground dungeon, where conditions were considered harsh for the weak and unaccustomed to the cold. Sometimes new arrivals even had to spend the night in the open. A lonely girl walked along a forest path, and two figures stood nearby. She thought about how much she loved living next to Nellie and being with Sarah, not out of duty, but of her own free will. On the sunlit path, two silhouettes stood side by side, a large wolf and a small girl. They silently shared a moment of mutual understanding and peace. Sarah was surprised to see that they had already entered the depths of the forest, and she wondered, wolves never leave their territory. But soon she saw several forest predators growling at each other. She watched warily as the two packs clashed over the prey. Her thoughts raced. It all resembled a struggle for survival, where everyone defends their own, preventing others from taking it. At sunset, the girl stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out over the border of the territory. A sense of determination filled her. She understood that here they were ready to fight to the last. Later, two figures approached a waterfall in the mountains. One gradually increased the distance they could walk, abandoning the familiar path and cautiously entering the depths of the forest, where a new chapter of their journey began. In the morning, Nellie approached Sarah, who was sitting at the table, and with a gentle smile asked if she had been having trouble falling asleep lately, since she seemed to be waking up earlier and earlier than usual. The dark-haired girl looked up in slight surprise, but Nellie calmly replied that she was sleeping well and there was no reason to worry. Sarah took her hands gently, asking her to tell her if anything suddenly became difficult, because it was important for her to know when Nellie needed support. Both sincerely admitted that they wanted to help Nellie. One spoke quietly and judiciously, and the other with ardent determination, as if promising to act at the first opportunity. Then Nellie explained that she worked as a huntress, protecting the mountain from monsters, and Sarah listened silently, sitting next to her in a simple wooden room filled with the smell of tea and herbs. The woman added that the order had come from the city of Rosa. She was to destroy the monsters descending on the settlement, and according to the commission's terms, she was obliged to remain in the mountains from spring to autumn. Sarah realized that it was because of her that Nellie couldn't leave the house, because her care for her kept her from leaving. This thought stung, making her wonder how Nellie had spent the long winter in isolation. The girl wanted to say something, but Nellie raised her hand, gently stopping her, explaining that she could stay in the house all year round, although in winter there were sometimes special requests for help. That evening, they sat on chairs, watching the sunset, and discussed how assignments often went to the strongest. Sarah thoughtfully asked what such a nomination actually meant. Nellie recalled that she had already refused a similar assignment last year, adding that if someone powerful was involved, refusal was acceptable. Meanwhile, in the distance, against the backdrop of nature, wolves were hunting a deer, as if echoing their conversation about survival. Sarah, holding her mug, admitted she felt a lot of pressure, and Nellie replied that this time, perhaps, refusal was impossible. A tense silence fell between them. After a short pause, Sarah said that Nellie always stays because she can't leave her alone, and she, on the contrary, is happy to live this way. Nellie confidently remarked that she was staying by Sarah's side by choice. Then her friend suggested with a smile that perhaps they should accept the assignment and tackle the task together. Later, they talked by the window, where the light reflected off the glass. One looked at the other in surprise, and the other thoughtfully admitted that she was afraid to entrust Sarah to people from the capital, in case they simply took her away. Sarah hesitated, not daring to ask a direct question, and only considered why this was causing her such concern. She wanted to understand, but not rush into an answer. After a while, she apologized, saying that she couldn't make a decision right away, and promised to talk to a reliable person when she got to the city the next day. Her friend happily offered to think it all through together, promising to find a way out, and Sarah enthusiastically agreed to go with her even to the Pink City. The next day, Nellie got ready to set out, checking her gear and saying a warm goodbye. Sarah told her to be careful and reminded her that her favorite sandwich was in the basket. Already on the road, Nellie remembered Chris from the Healers Guild, the very leader who could be trusted, and said that she was going to talk to him today. In a conversation with a fellow traveler, she noted that although the guild leader had strength and charisma, he had little common sense, after which she corrected herself, specifying that he would probably return in 3 or 4 days. She calmly said that she usually returns in 3 days, but this time she might be late, and if she was gone for 4 days, she needed to go to the city of Rose and contact Chris from the Healers Guild. Hearing someone call her name, Nellie turned around in surprise. The voice reminded her that even if she was alone, she still had an important task to complete that couldn't be postponed. Meanwhile, the man explained that the city was located next to an underground dungeon inhabited by hunters and local residents. He added that the climate there was harsh and cold, and sometimes people had to spend the night right in the open. The girl warmly wished her companion good luck, and he smiled softly and said it was time to go. A silence filled with calm understanding fell between them. The morning of the 5th day arrived. She packed a new backpack, checked her gear and supplies, remembering that 4 days had passed since Nellie had finished cleaning the cabin. Sarah reflected on how she had changed after the night's training. Together with Nellie, they slowly descended the mountains, hoping to reach the city when the magical barrier and tools were fully completed. The girl stood inside a transparent protective bubble and watched as two figures walked away between the tall trees under a gray sky. A strange feeling of loneliness overcame her. Sarah walked alongside her dog on the forest trail, thinking she needed to learn to climb faster so she wouldn't be a burden. All she wanted was to simply walk beside this faithful creature. She soon realized they had already entered the forest. She was surprised to see that the wolves, thought to be sedentary, were now wandering nearby, breaking their usual boundaries. Sarah stood calmly facing the entire pack, noticing that they were timber wolves. She said the name Mirren as if to calm herself, while the animals growled, their muscles tensing. A moment later, both noticed how two groups of predators were fighting each other over the prey, not allowing anyone to intervene and take the food away. One particularly large wolf growled louder than the rest, and the young man, dropping to one knee, sighed that he needed to rest a little, but at the same time not to lose his caution. After the albino wolves left Devil's Mountain and went down, she soon came to a straight path where a small space opened up in the middle of the forest. That night, Sarah settled in under a tree in a protective cube, noting that there were no signs of life around. However, the location seemed convenient for a temporary base on a long journey. In the morning, she sat quietly and watched a huge flock of sheep grazing on the plain. By her calculations, she still had 2 days' journey to the Pink City. Looking closely at the animals, Sarah thought they might not be monsters at all, since they weren't attacking. But then she noticed a rabbit with a horn and became wary. Suddenly, a small creature burst out of the grass. The girl slammed the ground hard, sending rocks flying, reflecting the force of the blow and the surprise on her face. She enthusiastically explained that the stone, reflected off the barrier, had helped her, as if it had become an ally. Thus it became clear that this was no ordinary rabbit at all, but something far more dangerous. Sarah examined the prey carefully. Sharp teeth, claws, and a long horn betrayed a predatory creature. She was disconcerted by the fact that the bones found nearby resembled human ones. Hesitantly, she thought about the city, then resolutely told herself she could sell the carcass there. After all, Nellie had taught her everything. Despite her inner doubts, Sarah realized that this, too, was part of growing up. The girl thought about the Pink City itself, where exactly the guild was located and how she and Nellie would explain their situation to the residents. Her thoughts flowed slowly, as if she had rehearsed the upcoming conversation in advance. By the Sunset Lake, next to a wooden bucket, she quietly considered asking more questions, as Nellie seemed calm. Then, feeling tired, she realized she simply needed a good wash. At that moment, a figure stood at the foot of a tree, peering into the distance. On the horizon, the city of Rosa was visible, shining in the rays of the setting sun, and beyond that, a view of mighty gates and fortified walls opened up. The girl exclaimed with delight that she finally saw him, having been walking here since noon. At the gate, 2 guards were discussing how they were the only ones on duty and wouldn't be relieved for now. Sarah walked in silence, watching as 2 soldiers hurried past, one of them hurrying the other to make it before sunset. At the eastern gate, a guard stopped her, warning her that this entrance was only open to trespassers, and advised her to go to the central passage, where it was safer. A little later, the young city dweller explained to the newcomer that only those with a pass could spend the night in Rosa, adding that he should head straight to the central gate. 2 guards warned Sarah not to stray from the road, lest she cross the city limits. They quietly discussed how difficult it was for the children of hunters, as life in wealthy Rose was unforgiving. One of the soldiers complained that he had not noticed the strange apparition due to the changing of the guard, and another reminded that horned rabbits had been spotted behind the walls again. It was better to stay away from the road. Sarah stood by the massive fortress wall, thinking that only Chris-sama and a few hunter guilds could pass freely. She was beginning to worry, where was the main entrance if the path to it was still undiscovered? She sat down by the brick wall, wearily admitting to herself that she hadn't rested today, since it was the day of her arrival. Noticing the herbs at the foot of the wall, she decided to add them to her supplies later. At the foot of the walls, she noticed rare medicinal plants and noted with interest that the specimens growing outside the city were much better than those inside. One of her companions suggested not working so late and spending the night right there, but the second was indignant, declaring that he would soon go crazy from fatigue. Sarah explained anxiously that the city was quarantined at night due to fear of unknown creatures, and her friend called her name, hearing a tremor in her voice. After a while, she came running in, out of breath, apologizing for being late. The others calmly replied that everything was fine and suggested they head to the gate together. Under the starry sky, two figures walked slowly toward a dark building. One explained that the doors were locked at night and entry into the city was prohibited, while the other sighed discontentedly, tired of the delays. Sarah sighed, realizing she wouldn't be able to meet Nellie today. She decided to take care of herself first, eat, rest, and gather her strength for tomorrow. She sat alone in the dimly lit courtyard, hugging her knees to her chest. A boy approached her and asked in surprise if there was even one working streetlight. The girl quietly answered, without looking up. Sitting next to the lamp, Sarah cautioned him not to turn on the light alone, explaining that some townspeople looked askance at it. Then she thanked him for his company, and he listened silently, with a slight smile. Lucas assured them they had nothing to fear with the barrier box and said goodbye. Erica turned around in surprise, asking what had happened, but he merely waved his hand and disappeared into the darkness. By the fire, a boy approached Sarah and asked if she was feeling unwell. She hesitated a bit, thinking he might be trying to trick her, and didn't answer right away. Then another asked if she was suffering, and Sarah remembered how Nellie had once asked her the same question when they first met, with the same tone of concern in her voice. The boy, feeling awkward and unsure why she'd asked that question, asked, a little nervously, to speak to him. All he got in response was a low growl, and he took a confused step back. A little later, Sarah hesitantly invited him to eat together, and he was surprised, not expecting such an invitation, but after hesitating, he sat down next to her. Off to the side, two children sat quietly in a cage. One said the box looked like it could be eaten, while the other wondered if it was magical. Nearby, a girl warned Sarah to be careful, the tension was palpable in the air. Lucas, leaning against the stone wall and holding a basket, thought that a person who was able to share food, even when hungry, cannot be bad. Sarah agreed that there was enough food for both of them, and the boy began to eat. It occurred to him that if she allowed it, then he could do as he pleased. The girl watched him eat, smiling. He, noticing her gaze, quickly replied that everything was fine, and then she asked if the food was tasty, looking at him in the softly burning lamplight. The cheerful girl handed the surprised white-haired boy a piece from her hands, inviting him to try it, while another guy nearby watched them with curiosity. The boy politely declined, saying he was already full, but thanked him, noting that the food was delicious. Then the girl introduced herself as Alan and handed him a few coins. Under the starry sky, he explained that 1,500 gil was her payment, adding that it was the local currency. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She happily showed him the money, amazed by the find, and he asked if she hadn't known there was currency here. Sarah admitted she'd never thought about it. Then the girl, slightly timidly, handed the coins to another, explaining that she had earned them by gathering herbs, but all transactions had to be conducted through Nellie. The other man reacted nervously to her confession. Sitting next to the lamp, her clothes soiled and her hands dirty, Sarah wondered if the magic she was using was worthy of being called noble if it looked so simple. The young man said that he lived with his sister far from the city, but she did not return from the village of Rosa, and since then no one has heard anything about her. He smiled, saying she would definitely find it. Sarah quietly thanked him, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time. She insisted on paying for the meal properly, and he reluctantly accepted it. Their fingers brushed briefly as the coins passed from hand to hand. The boy thanked her for dinner and asked to talk for a bit. The girl agreed and looked at him carefully when he suddenly fell silent, as if choosing his words. Alan thought he hadn't spoken to someone his own age in a long time, and this simple conversation felt surprisingly warm. 2 cups of hot drink steamed quietly nearby. The young man explained that an excess of magical power often repels others, people feel pressured and avoid it. Sarah listened silently, feeling slightly uneasy, but she didn't look away. Under the starry sky, the two sat side by side, and the boy explained how he had been raised by a wizard uncle who had tricked him into taking on a debt. He recalled wandering through dungeons, trying to find a way to repay the money. They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the night. The girl confessed that she was now completely alone, and he replied that he was working in various places around the city, saving money, although he didn't have a home of his own. The boy firmly declared that the debt was still outstanding, but he intended to join the Hunters Guild and earn a living hunting in dungeons. His words surprised those listening nearby. Sarah said the word dungeon hesitantly, as if checking to see if she'd understood correctly. The boy noted with surprise that she clearly knew little about them, and she quickly denied it, blushing. Two children happily discussed the registration for the sale of demonic materials, realizing they were the same age. The others watched their animated conversation with interest. Alan paused, processing what he had heard, then told Sarah to wait a bit, deciding how to proceed and whether it was worth the risk. Erica learned from the boy that joining the Hunters Guild costs 100,000 gil, and asked in surprise if he had that kind of money. He admitted his carelessness, adding that he had made a mistake in his calculations, and the girl explained that Nellie had not touched the accumulated funds for 2 years and had not received them before her trip to the city. The dark-haired girl tearfully assured that she had a lot of medicinal herbs, and the fair-haired boy carefully replied that everything was fine, trying to calm her down. Sarah insisted that only herbs from the Apothecary Guild could be sold and promised to make money, but the guy doubted whether it was possible to sell unregistered plants, considering it risky. They sat side by side in the empty courtyard. One doubted the place had arisen naturally, recalling the rare harvests from the south, and then the boy asked Sarah if she knew these herbs. She nodded confidently. The guy promised to show the girl his city, and when she asked him to teach her how to collect medicinal plants, he happily agreed to meet the next day. The boy smiled warmly, excited to spend time together, and Sarah invited him to come in the morning. He felt an unexpected sense of calm at her friendliness. Someone explained that the plant was medicinal but warned against picking too much to allow it to grow back, while another admitted that he could not understand the taste and noted its similarity to another species. Sarah enthusiastically agreed to the collection, and Alan reminded them not to forget what they had already found and laughed softly. They began counting the bunches. Sarah proudly announced that she had 10, and the other girl admired Alan's dexterity, wondering if his innate independence contributed to his success. Sarah and Alan stood at the city wall, discussing why no one collected herbs outside the city, wondering how many were growing there unattended. Alan explained that most townspeople never leave the walls, except for hunters. Sarah listened attentively, holding flowers, and pondered the courage of such people. The girl realized that the city's protective spell was useless against powerful creatures, making it too dangerous to venture outside. The boy explained the system of walls and entrances to the dungeon that protected the townspeople. As they approached the central gate, Alan warned Sarah to be on guard. Even the most intelligent monsters would not understand their intentions if something went wrong. The girl gazed admiringly at the city of Rosa, shining in the sunlight, while the boy explained that during the day, one could enter and exit without restrictions. The bustling inhabitants, merchants, hunters, and children were buzzing around the fountain, creating the feeling of a living world. They walked through the busy streets, where numerous hunters reminded Nellie of their gear. One of their companions suggested they stop by the Apothecaries Guild first, so as not to waste time. Sarah wondered if this Chris was important, but the boy asked with a smile if she knew Mr. Chris and suggested they go straight to the second floor. The girl remembered the advice to trust the leader of the Healers Guild if anything happened to Nellie. Soon they stopped in front of an ancient wall in the city's center. Examining the layers of fortifications, their interlocutor explained that they were already on the third level, the newest sector of the Rose. Sarah, looking at the map, noted with confusion that everything looked confusing. The headman's residence was shown on the first level, and she was having trouble understanding whether the interior plan of the second floor matched the image. The man behind the counter politely asked how he could help, but the young man replied that he could wait. After all, someone had come to inquire about the affairs of the Apothecary Guild. Sarah and her companion exchanged curious glances. The silver-haired man sharply warned the dark-haired girl and the blonde man not to approach the boy with black locks. A strong magical pressure emanating from Alan could be felt in him. Sarah introduced herself and explained that she was looking for her older sister, Nellie, who had gone to the city of Rosa and had never returned. The clerk asked what she knew about her sister. She described Nellie as a beautiful red-haired girl with green eyes, about 20 years old and of average height. The man remarked that he had never met anyone like her here. Sarah then assumed that Nellie was supposed to come to sell medicinal herbs to the Healers Guild, but no one had seen her since then and there were no traces of the visit. The boy remembered being told that if his sister didn't return within 4 days, he should look for Chris from the Brotherhood of Healers. Hearing this, the man was visibly surprised. Sarah asked doubtfully if it was a woman's trick to approach Lord Chris, but when she learned that he was temporarily absent for personal reasons, she wondered when he would return. Alan called out to Sarah from afar, and she looked around anxiously, thinking they'd reached a dead end. He admitted he wasn't sure of the route and added that he'd check with the hunters later. The girl reasoned that Nellie was most likely selling monster materials through the Hunters Guild, and it was too early to worry. Meanwhile, nearby, Alan introduced himself to the group, trying to establish contact. The fair-haired young man calmly said his name was Ted and added that he was not interested, which caused a mixed reaction among those listening. One understood him, the other frowned. One guy announced he was there to sell weed, surprising the employee who asked him to join the line. A third quietly suggested staying away from Alan and checking on Sarah's share. Alan explained that he needed 20,000 gil to join the Hunters Guild and hoped to make a quick buck selling herbs. Sarah enthusiastically agreed that it was a good idea. Having finished counting, he said that 2 bunches made 20 pieces in total, adding that each was worth 1,000 gil. Sarah was astonished by the price. The girl explained that the price of medicinal herbs needed for potions and elixirs was set by the Apothecary Guild, and 10 bunches should cost no less than 5,000 gil. The man behind the counter, who introduced himself as Ted, explained to 2 customers that the quality and freshness of the herbs varied, causing the price to fluctuate, and he could not sell them at a fixed retail rate. 2 children stood before the man behind the counter, who, with a slight smile, introduced himself as an orphan from the Order of the Cloaks. The children listened attentively, watching his every movement with curiosity. The confident young man mockingly spoke of rumors that some unknown children had snuck onto the guild's 2nd floor. The girl next to him remained silent, staring at him in surprise, trying to figure out who he was. She gradually realized that someone was trying to take advantage of Alan's weakness, while those around her discussed his past and the properties of medicinal herbs, as if weighing their benefits. The man gently handed her a small bouquet and told her to keep it, adding that there was no point in selling it if the price wasn't fair. Sarah accepted the gift with confusion, unsure how to respond. As an apology, the girl silently placed 2 silver coins on the counter, feeling awkward for wasting her time, while the man behind her just silently watched what was happening. Later, they stood by the fountain in the paved square, recalling how selling herbs in the mountains had felt like a scam. It was then, for the first time, that she thought perhaps she should have given up so quickly. Alan answered calmly, but there was a quiet sadness in his voice, as if such disappointments had become habitual. They walked down a narrow street, and Sarah felt the city's oppressive indifference weighing on her. She soon began to understand what Nellie was talking about, and when they reached the Hunters Guild, the boy remarked that life in Rose was not a test for the weak. In front of a building with a huge wyvern flag, Sarah cheerfully suggested asking the receptionist about her sister. Alan chuckled, agreeing that it was a reasonable idea. Inside, they found a spacious hall resembling a tavern. A cheerful young man asked Alan if he'd managed to save up any money, and Sarah noted with admiration how large and lively the place was. At the reception desk of Vince's guild, a man warmly welcomed new visitors, and Sarah, standing nearby, thought that this day had turned out to be a little scary. The girl shuddered when the young man, who called himself Sarah, explained that he was looking for his missing sister and Rose and was simply asking people around without a specific assignment. Suddenly, the young woman asked the man about his sister's appearance, and he looked slightly confused before answering, choosing his words. The guy, a little embarrassed, admitted that he understood his interlocutor's affection for her sister, but he had no idea who she really was. The woman replied that, in terms of appearance alone, she thought she looked like a goddess. The man behind the counter listened silently, showing no emotion. Sarah remembered Nellie's last words: if she didn't return home, she should trust Chris from the Healers Guild. But overhearing others' conversations, she had a hard time holding back her tears. The dark-haired man asked the blonde man if he'd been to the Healers Guild. The young man replied that he'd been ignored there, and the herbs he'd collected had almost been sold without permission. The girl asked if he was talking about medicinal herbs. He nodded and explained that he'd been gathering them since dawn, following his grandfather's advice. One of the men examined the herbs and asked the price. The second reacted with surprise when he heard that 100 items were valued at only 1,000 gil. Some were outraged, thinking such deals were insane during a crucial battle for the capital's medicinal resources, but another explained that Alan wasn't angry, he was simply accustomed to prejudice. The girl admitted how upset she was by the whole situation, and the boy listened silently, without interrupting. Soon, one of the men asked if she was Sarah, and she quietly confirmed it. The man explained that Sarah had gone looking for her sister, but she had neither the money nor the means to register with the Hunters Guild. Furthermore, she couldn't sell herbs without risking losing her home. The girl nervously agreed, adding that her actions probably seemed reckless. The man simply nodded calmly, accepting her frankness. He inquired about how much he needed to save to join the guild and discovered that 20,000 ghouls were missing. He then urgently asked Alan to pay the registration fee quickly. Two men discussed selling a special medicinal herb through the Hunters Guild, noting the 30% discount at the mountain pharmacy and claiming that after registration all problems would be solved. The young man greeted Alan happily and called him the guild leader, but the other man sternly warned him not to interfere without warning. The man reminded them that acting as an intermediary in the sale of property violated their agreement, demanded that everything be kept secret and that they refrain from open advertising, adding that the process was progressing according to plan. The boy explained that Alan had secretly registered as a reseller. The two men listened attentively, one acknowledged the information was important, the other questioned whether they had any other options at this point. The young woman listened as the man behind the counter explained that once you joined the guild, your background no longer mattered. She felt a quiet joy, having finally found a place she could call Alan's home. The four stood behind the counter, and the embarrassed but determined girl looked at her companions. Then one of the boys suggested they go out for lunch to gain strength before the rest of the day.